we are talking about fashion, which, as you can see, means I have the best dressed panel of the day. So we've been talking a lot over the last couple of days about reducing our use of different things. Plastics, sort of the first thing that comes to mind. And I want to start by asking if we should be having that same conversation about fashion. What's the role of companies in terms of, should they play a role? And Dee, maybe you want to start with that. I think that's a good one for you.
So I sit here on this panel as actually sort of two sides of this industry. Our company is a manufacturer, but I run our brands unit. And so on the one hand, I see this question from the side of manufacturing, but on the other hand, I realize that as a manufacturer, what you do is really what your customers ask you to do, right? But as a brand owner, I get to reshape that conversation. And so while on the manufacturing side, I think brands have been very innovative in ways that they've been trying to work with their partners, but at the end of the day, we're just making more stuff. And so last year, or 2 years ago, we actually started a brand that was a minimalist brand. And it started really for two reasons. The first was that we realized this concept of decision fatigue, right? Everybody makes a lot of decisions and it's, just hurting your brains. But the second was we realized that if we're really gonna be green, how do we change the culture? How do we make buying less sexy? Because there's only so much we can do around asking people, around cleaning up the supply chain until we actually get to the cradle-to-cradle point where every single thing we do is adding up. So that was one of the ideas that we really took.
So minimalist brand, explain what that means.
So it really only has a few core products. And so, in today's market, you think about it, and the cost of customer acquisition is high. You sit there, if you get someone in the door, you're trying to maximize the customer lifetime value of this person by selling them as much from you as possible. What we did was one of the ways you do that is by having more products, right? And what we said was, well, we'll fly in the face of convention. We know that our customer is stressed. He's probably not a fashionista, so fashion is not his first goal, but he needs an appropriate product that solves his fashion problem, because everybody needs to look good. That's the first principle of dressing, right? Looking good. And so that's really where we started. And so now we have 2 dress shirts, a long sleeve and a short sleeve, and 2 casual or smart casual shirts. And really the idea is everything we make can be worn at any point, and it's just there to to solve your problem. And so, you don't wake up every morning and you think this one or this one or that one or that one. You just go back to the same few basics. But in the meantime, you're generating less waste in both the physical sense as well as the mental sense.
Interesting. So Noel, how do you think about that at Nike? What's kind of the perspective around consumption?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. First, I'd pull back a little bit to the consumer engagement that we have as a brand of our size and the relationships that we have with our consumers. And largely what they'll tell us is that we want your products to be cool, we want it to be Nike, we want it to perform, and oh, by the way, we want it to be sustainable, and that's just the cost of your engagement with us as a consumer and with you as a brand. And so we've kind of aligned on two major components of what that feels like. Number one, this notion of circularity, and Bill did a great job of the notion of cradle to cradle. And back in May, we launched a circular design guide that's really focused on things like design for reuse, design for repair, design for disassembly, design for reincorporation back into some of our own products. I won't do too much show and tell, but for example, the air sole on this shoe is 75% recycled content already. And somebody mentioned this earlier. What's more capitalistic than using your own waste as feedstock into new product? And so we really align on that. And then there's this notion of material innovation. You've got to innovate the materials so that they have a lower carbon footprint, that they create less waste. In our case, things like fly leather, where you're using recycled leather to improve the environmental properties of the materials, and then making sure that from an innovation standpoint, that you have a pipeline of materials that you can not only show what's possible, but then scale that to billions of units in our case.
So you mentioned sort of all the expectations that consumers have now about your brand. Are they willing to pay more for it?
I don't know the answer to that, to be totally honest with you. What I hear from consumers as we engage with them is that they expect sustainability to be a core attribute of the products that they buy from a brand like Nike, period. I don't know that they feel like they should have to pay more for that. I think that millennials, Gen Z, which are kind of the core cohort of our consumer demographic, expect us as a brand to opt to include sustainability as part of the way we design into a problem set. It has to improve athlete performance, and it has to be sustainable. And so that's really the way that we attack the product creation process.
So it's an expectation.
Exactly.
Okay, so Jinqing, you run luxury brands. I don't think luxury has always been associated with sustainability, but that seems to be changing. Tell me a little bit about that. How is that shifting in your market?
Yes, so Kering has a group of over 14 different luxury brands, from fashion to leather goods to jewelry and watches. And today's consumer, as Noah was just saying, a lot of them are millennials, the younger generation who embrace luxury products like no record before. And I think the young consumers, they really demand to be brands and products to be more sustainable and ethical. And for Kering, we have tried sustainability practice as part of the business, a business imperative, rather than just for communications or rather than for corporate social responsibilities. So our sustainability is really embedded in our business. And that's how we also demand or challenge our brands to do. For instance, at Kering, we created Material Innovation Lab, which garner over 3,000 sustainable material samples. And all the designers from all the brands can come to the lab and test their different material. And they can also talk to our specialists and create new materials that meet the designer's needs, but at the same time sustainable. And our specialists in the sustainability lab also goes to work with a lot of suppliers. For instance, organic silk, actually a lot of it is sourced in China. China is one of the largest silk base. And we work with a lot of the suppliers who work with a lot of the suppliers here to create more organic silk, and for us to scale that up with all these brands, and that just accelerate this whole sustainable new material into our industry. And I think we also realize just one company alone cannot do it. We are such a tiny little bit player compared to this whole fashion industry. So collaboration is the key. Just recently at G7, was our CEO who was entrusted by President Macron to actually start an industry coalition. And it was really one of the, I would say, the largest revolutionary pact ever organized. They're representing about 20% of the whole fashion industry in terms of the product. And 32 companies represent 150 brands. So that's what we realize. More brands, more companies in the fashion industry, they see the urgency from their own business perspective, from consumer perspective, and also now with regulation and government initiatives, they really are at the stage, a tipping point, to really do some serious, in-depth transformation of the industry.
So it sounds like you're pushing your suppliers to
Yes.
make. So Dee, let me ask you, do you feel like you're being pushed, or are you pushing the brands that you work with?
Our company, I guess, slogan or vision statement is making a difference. And we have this thing called e-culture, and the first E is ethics, and the second E is environment. And so from our point of view, we're very lucky that we are really encoded with this desire and vision to create this change. With that, we get to often bring product to brands, and often brands will come and reverse challenge and be like, hey, can you try this, or can you try that, right? So I think it's really a collaborative effort, and I think it requires people to be open to changing some of the things or norms around how these products are considered, built, understood, and assessed so that it can really be done.
Yeah, maybe I build on that a little bit. I mean, you mentioned the notion of collaboration, and we actually, at Kering's invitation, and signed on to the G7 commitment as well. But I think the partnership is a really important component too. Over the years, we whittled our source base from 1,700 manufacturers down to less than 600 now. And part of what that allows is that you have that depth of the relationship, you have the longevity, you have the shared alignment of goals, and so you can kind of have a back and forth on how do we improve the environmental footprint of a manufacturing facility, what are the new apparel technologies or fabric textile technologies that we can integrate. That's really important to driving this, particularly when you're a big global brand with a really big extended supply chain. But to your point, I think that even with that relationship, that's still a brand with its source base. You have to be able to rely on kind of a pre-competitive collaborative approach, particularly when you're talking about things as big as climate change or waste in the fashion industry. We absolutely have to work together. And I think one of the things that's been really gratifying for me in this role is having a relationship with Brie Claire at Kering, having a relationship with my peers at companies like H&M or even direct competitors like Adidas. It's really energizing that I know that I can call them if we have a proposition like the G7 commitment that Kering did and invite partners like that in.
So you mentioned circularity before at the beginning, and I want to go back to that notion because have we really achieved that in the fashion industry? You know, when I'm done with this product, what happens to it, and are we getting better at kind of reusing and repurposing? Maybe Dee, you could talk a little bit about that.
So last year I started a recycled cotton platform across our company. We're a cotton house, and I went to see one of the companies that we work with, and it's Patagonia. And I said, how do you feel about this? They're like, well, it's great. And I was like, well, how do you feel about recycling? They're like, honestly, like it's great, but at the end of the day, every time you recycle something, it still degrades. Mm. And so, you know, again, like they push back, and that's one of the things I really value when I work with different types of people, is this idea that what you're doing is wonderful, but how do we even take it further, right? And so they talked about their Reworn platform, et cetera. So I think circularity, I think at this point, every baby step is important. Every low-hanging fruit point is important, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try for transformational change either. And I think that's sort of the point where we're at right now that's a little bit tense, is there are some things that we can do now, there are some things that could come in the future, and you know, do you want to put some money down here, or do you want to try to just moonshot it? And how do you balance that?
Right.
So give me an example, maybe all of you, I'd love to hear. What do you view as a moonshot for your company?
I mean, I guess like zero waste, zero discharge.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think is actually possible? Could you get there?
I think a lot of it has to...
I don't do manufacturing, so you're sort of asking the wrong person.
Just say yes, it'll be fine.
I think a lot of it has to be really relying on innovation, transformative, disruptive innovation. We have a 2025 strategy on sustainability, where as a company, we committed to reduce 40% of environmental footprint and 50% of greenhouse gas emission. And what we can see now today, you know, we can probably through our initiatives and all the project and tryout that we're doing, maybe solve or reduce 20% of that. The other 20% are still out there, we don't know. But that's why I think collaboration or open source is important, because we started this collaboration with Plug and Play, which is a Silicon Valley accelerator, to scout and encourage startups who are finding solutions and technology innovations in textile industry. I think in that whole process, we probably met hundreds of these startups, young people. A lot of them are millennial and even Gen Z, you know, trying to make a difference and create a business solution that can tackle the biggest challenge on earth. And it's very encouraging. For instance, in that process, we found companies who are really creating, you know, turning mushroom into leather. Worn Again, which is another one, they recycle and really separate the polyester from the cotton, and then sort of a reuse and spin them into new fabric. And in China, we started since last December this process as well, which we call K-Generation Award, because we want to really encourage a lot of these startups to focus on textile innovation. China is still in early stage, I would say, compared to what we have seen in Europe and the US in this technology innovation in the textile space. But you meet a lot of these entrepreneurs who are looking for alternative new materials, new process in the production, and also new consumption model. You know, this one company based in Beijing who are already they said they have over 1 million subscribers already, sort of have a what do you call that, rental model, right? So it's like basically young people, you know, they love brands, they love luxury, but they don't, you know, they can't afford to spend all this money. But the rental model, which based on membership, they can every week you can have a new box delivered to your home, and then you get this week of the outfit. And then actually, it's a shared economy concept, and it's well accepted in this market in China, which consumption is very innovative. So I think a lot of these innovation will make a huge difference.
Yeah. So, and you're investing in those kinds
Yes.
of companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to have a moonshot. That's one of the things that our brand kind of thrives on. Some of you may be familiar with the Breaking 2 moonshot that we put out there to break the 2-hour marathon. And we didn't make it, but that's not really the point. The point is to put that marker out there and pull to it.
Tell people more about that.
So this was a couple of years ago. We worked with Eliud Kipchoge, who's one of the premier marathoners in the world, to set a goal to break the 2-hour marathon, which plenty of people said was completely impossible. I think he got within 20 or so seconds of it. And it was on a closed track. It wasn't an actual marathon. But about a year later, he came out and set the world record for the marathon in Berlin. So I think it shows it's a great way to inspire people to innovate further. And for us, we're committed to being the most sustainable sports and fitness brand in the world. And so our moonshot at the moment is reduce our carbon footprint to zero and reduce our waste to zero. Now, there are important milestones along that path, right? You have to have, as you said, hey, by 2030, we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 30%. We're going to measure our progress between here and there. And in our case, I have to report that progress to our board of directors. And so you have to have the governance in place in order to hold yourself and your organization accountable for those goals. But those goals have to be a function of a vision that's further out there that motivates people to do things differently.
So if sustainability is now an expectation in your brand, have you changed how you talk about it with the consumer, how you market?
That's a really good point. I think I would characterize the way we've operated over the years as quietly committed. We've been really diligent about trying to do the right thing and measuring ourselves and holding ourselves accountable publicly to our environmental targets, to the way that labor practices are managed in our factories with our partners, and have always been really transparent about that. But now that it is more of an expectation, I kind of view that as an accelerant to the commitment that we already have. And so being more overt about communicating to consumers what the recycled content of a product might be, how does that actually translate to them? I mean, for example, I could say that that part of the shoe was made from recycled polyester, but your average consumer may not understand what that actually means. Well, in their case, it may mean that it's made from X number of recycled water bottles. And so framing it in a language that's meaningful to them, that they can relate to day to day and kind of go, oh, okay, I get it. I'm doing X by purchasing this product over that product.
Got it. Okay.
And also, I think transparency is so important in this communication, being authentic and being transparent. So, for instance, at Kering, we developed this methodology to measure what we call environmental P&L. Basically, the supply chain, our own operations, the environmental impact is attached to a monetary value. And
so you actually quantify.
Yeah, we quantify it, and that's how we are able to commit on these very quantifiable goals. Like 2025, we want to hit this, and 2030, we want to hit that. What in the process, I think is very effective is, we decided we developed this methodology in 2013, but we decided to put it online on our own website and open source it, because we want everybody to know that we are actually being very, take responsibility and measure everything we do. Not only that, we also collaborate with our entire supply chain and to deliver 100% traceability and making sure all our suppliers are meeting the Kering high standard on sourcing. And I think all these become well known in the industry. That Kering is known as the houses which has very serious sustainability practices, and it translates to consumers as well.
Yeah. Dee, how do you talk about this as kind of behind the brand sometimes? Is this something that you work with with companies and that you interface with, and about how they should be relaying this to consumers?
I mean, we definitely do work with some of our partners in trying to relay these messages, and I think it is really hard because I think the consumer wants something that they can recognize and just act upon. So they like things recycled, they like, you know, some type of mark, when in reality production is much more complicated and cannot be reduced to a single, you know, well, this is the green stamp of approval, right? I mean, I think what is interesting about the fashion industry and that directly relates to sustainability is that they're both about values. Right, so who determines what is fashionable? Who determines what is nice? It comes from the eye of the consumer. And so who determines what's more important? Like, we work in cotton. What's more important to you? Chemical and pesticides or water? And if you believe in organic, if you believe it's pesticides and chemicals, then go organic. But organic cotton takes 30% more water to farm than organic cotton. So you sit there and you have to really grapple with these very hard questions. And then I think the question is, we all try to create these quantifiable measures, right? But at the end of the day, you still have to have someone sitting there pulling the trigger and deciding, this is the thing that we find important, right? And we're gonna put our we're gonna value, you know, again, we could all go towards putting all of our money into green issues and climate issues, but for me, what's very important, and one of the things that made climate very striking was when there was a big flood. Actually, we've had a series of floods around our factory of late, and all the workers, they had things, you know, just all their assets, they just were swept away. And so for me, people are really important, right? And so these are the value questions I think that the industry really needs to struggle with and decide what is important. And I think it's really great that there are so many leaders who are willing to step up and discuss what they think is important, and hopefully share that with consumers as well.
I think that's a really good point. And unfortunately, we don't have time to dive in, but I think the labor question is one that we should tackle next, because I think that is a huge part of what you do, and especially in this region of the world. So thank you all, really appreciate it.
Thank you.